The silverware clattered against my plate as my father's words hung in the air. "We've decided you're no longer welcome in this family." Everyone at the Christmas table froze. My aunt stopped mid-chew. My brother suddenly found his napkin fascinating. No one would look at me, except my mother, whose eyes held nothing but cold resolve. 20 years of showing up for them, supporting them, loving them, erased with a single dinner announcement. But what they didn't realize when they disowned me between the turkey and dessert? I controlled the $680,000 inheritance they were counting on to save their crumbling finances. They thought I'd disappear quietly into the winter night. I decided to show them exactly who they'd thrown away instead. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Samantha Mitchell. At 34, I'd built a life most people would envy. Senior financial analyst at a prestigious firm in Boston, my own brownstone in Beacon Hill, and despite the distance, regular visits to my family in Pennsylvania. Family that, until last Christmas, I thought I knew. I'd always been different from the rest of the Mitchells. They were small-town people with small-town dreams. My father, David, ran the local hardware store his father had started. My mother, Patricia, taught 3rd grade at the same elementary school for 30 years. My younger brother, Kevin, took over my uncle's insurance agency right after college. They lived within 5 miles of each other in Westbrook, Pennsylvania, population 8,612, where generations of Mitchells had built their lives. Then there was me, the one who left, the one who wanted more. "You always reach for things above your station," my mother used to say, half proud, half worried. I never understood what she meant until later, much later. I pulled into my parents' snow-covered driveway on December 23rd last year, the heater, in my Audi still blasting as I gathered the carefully wrapped presents from the passenger seat. The 2-story colonial looked exactly as it always had during Christmas, lights outlining the roof and windows, the pine wreath with the red velvet bow hanging on the dark green door, smoke curling from the chimney into the gray winter sky. Home. Despite our differences, despite the subtle tension that always hummed beneath our conversations, it was still home. Mom answered the door in her Christmas apron, the one with embroidered reindeer that I'd given her years ago. "Samantha, we weren't expecting you until tomorrow." Her hug was quick, perfunctory. I should have noticed then. I finished my reports early and thought I'd beat the snow. I stepped inside, breathing in the familiar scent of cinnamon and pine. Where should I put these? I lifted the bags of gifts. Under the tree is fine. Your father's watching the game in the den. Kevin and Diane are coming tomorrow with the kids. She turned back toward the kitchen without taking my coat. I placed the presents under the 7-foot Douglas fir that dominated the living room, noting how perfectly coordinated the ornaments were, all red and gold, not a single homemade childhood craft in sight. My baby's first Christmas ornament from 1989 was conspicuously absent. So were the clay handprints I'd made in elementary school and the glittery pine cone from my Girl Scout days. The tree looked like a department store display, beautiful, but sterile, impersonal. "Dad?" I called, entering the den where the glow of the television illuminated my father's recliner. He glanced up, nodded. "Samantha, didn't think you'd be here today." "Surprise," I smiled, leaning down to hug him. His arms barely lifted to return the gesture. "How's business?" "Fine. Usual holiday rush." His attention returned to the screen. I stood awkwardly, still in my coat. "I'll just get settled upstairs then." No response. I climbed the familiar stairs to my old bedroom, which had been converted to a guest room years ago. Opening the door, I stopped short. The twin bed that usually occupied the space was gone, replaced by cardboard boxes labeled tax records and Kevin's old school things. A small air mattress had been hastily inflated in the corner. I set my overnight bag down slowly, processing the message this room was sending. Not even a guest anymore. An afterthought. That evening, as I helped Mom prepare dinner, the conversation felt strained, consisting mainly of the blandest topics: weather forecasts, traffic patterns, which grocery store had better produce this season. When I mentioned my recent promotion, Mom nodded without looking up from the carrots she was chopping. "That's nice, dear. Kevin's agency just signed that new partnership with Midwest Insurance. They're projecting 30% growth next quarter." My promotion had come with a 40% salary increase and a team of 11 people reporting to me. But I just smiled and said, "That's great for Kevin." After dinner, I offered to wash dishes while Mom and Dad watched their show. As I scrubbed at a particularly stubborn pot, I noticed papers spread across the kitchen table that they'd hastily stacked when I'd arrived. Curiosity got the better of me. I wiped my hands and quietly flipped through them. Second mortgage application, past due notices, a letter from a debt consolidation company, financial statements showing withdrawals from retirement accounts, an estimate for significant foundation repairs to the house. The Mitchells, the stable, sensible family who had always criticized my risky career in finance, were drowning in debt. I returned the papers exactly as I'd found them and finished the dishes, mind racing. Was this why the atmosphere felt so tense? Were they embarrassed about their financial situation? I resolved to find a tactful way to offer help. Christmas Eve brought fresh snow and the arrival of Kevin, his wife Diane, and their 2 children, Emma and Jack, ages 7 and 5. The house instantly transformed. My parents beamed as they scooped up their grandchildren, the stiffness from the previous evening melting away like snow on a warm window. "Aunt Sam!" Emma hurled herself at my legs. "Did you bring me something? From the big city?" "Emma, don't be rude," Diane chided, but with no real conviction. She gave me a brief hug. "Good to see you, Samantha. Love the highlights." Kevin followed, carrying an enormous stack of presents that dwarfed my modest pile. "Hey, sis. How's the rat race treating you?" "Can't complain," I replied, helping him with the gifts. "Your agency's doing well, I hear. Crushing it." He winked. "But hey, not everyone's cut out for small business leadership. Your corporate job sounds." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Stable. The subtle dig wasn't new. Kevin had always positioned his work as more authentic, more respectable than my shuffling money around for rich people, as he once described it. Never mind that my money shuffling had helped me pay off my student loans in 3 years and purchase my home before 30. Throughout the day, I noticed a pattern. Conversations flowed easily until I joined them, then became stilted or changed direction. My parents doted on Kevin's children, but barely acknowledged the limited edition signed copy of my mom's favorite author's new book that I'd spent months tracking down. Dinner that night was traditional Mitchell fare: roast beef, mashed potatoes, green bean casserole with the crispy onions on top. As we ate, Kevin dominated the conversation with stories about local people I barely remembered and business connections he was cultivating. "Oh, and Dad," he said between bites. "Jim Harker asked about that fishing cabin property again. Said his offer stands if you're interested." My father nodded thoughtfully. "Might be time to consider it, especially with..." His eyes flicked to me, then away. "Well, we can discuss it later." The cabin. My grandfather's cherished retreat in the Poconos, where he'd taught me to fish and identify constellations during summer evenings. The property that had been in our family for 3 generations. They were considering selling it? Later, as everyone gathered in the living room to watch a Christmas movie, I overheard my mother and Diane whispering in the hallway. "When are you going to tell her?" Diane asked. "Tomorrow, after dinner," my mother replied. "David thinks it's best with everyone." Here, a united front. Is she going to cause problems? She always does in her way. But what choice do we have now? The letters from the attorney were clear. I slipped away before they noticed me, my stomach twisting into knots. Whatever was happening, I was the last to know, and apparently the target of some kind of family intervention. That night, I barely slept on the air mattress, my back aching, my thoughts churning. I pulled out my laptop and checked my work email, needing the comfort of something familiar, something that valued me. Among the usual holiday messages was one from Margaret Holloway, my grandfather's former colleague and attorney. Samantha, hope you're enjoying the holidays. Just a reminder that the trust transition finalizes on January 2nd. As trustee, you'll need to sign the final paperwork before distributions can begin. Your grandfather would be proud of how you've handled everything this year. I stared at the screen, pieces clicking into place. My grandfather, Harold Mitchell, had passed away 11 months ago, a successful businessman who'd built several companies. Before retiring, he'd always been my champion, the one who'd encouraged my interest in finance and supported my move to Boston. He'd also been notoriously private about his finances. Even my father, his only son, didn't know the full extent of his estate. I'd been asked to meet privately with Margaret after the funeral, where I learned he'd appointed me, not my father, as trustee of his estate. "You've got the head for it," Margaret had explained. "Harold was adamant about this. Said you were the only one who truly understood value versus price. The estate wasn't enormous by wealthy standards, about $680,000 in investments, property, and cash, but it was significant for a family like ours. My grandfather had structured it with specific distributions, 40% to my father, 25% each to Kevin and me, and 10% to a scholarship fund at the local community college. As trustee, I was responsible for ensuring the distributions happened according to his wishes, but I had discretionary power over timing and conditions. Margaret had advised keeping my role private until everything was finalized. Family dynamics can get complicated around money, she'd warned. Best to have everything in order first. I'd followed her advice, mentioning only that we all had small inheritances coming after the estate cleared probate. No one had questioned it, until now, apparently. Christmas morning arrived with forced cheer. We opened presents by the fireplace, everyone exclaiming over the children's delight. My gifts, carefully chosen books for my parents, a premium whiskey for Kevin, designer winter accessories for Diane, educational toys for the kids, were met with polite thanks, but quickly set aside. Throughout the day, I caught my parents and Kevin exchanging glances, checking the time, a current of anticipation running beneath their holiday activities. Whatever they had planned, it was weighing on them. Christmas dinner was a formal affair at the Mitchell house. Fine china that only appeared once a year, crystal glasses, the heavy silver candlesticks that had belonged to my grandmother. I helped set the table while Mom fussed over her turkey, occasionally giving me instructions, then immediately contradicting them. Put the water glasses above the knives. No, actually, to the right of the wine glasses. And use the cream tablecloth. Wait, the green one would be better for Christmas. Her anxiety was palpable, making my own worse. What was so important that it had everyone on edge? We sat down to dinner at 4 o'clock precisely. Dad at the head of the table, Mom at the foot, Kevin and Diane on one side with the children, me alone on the other. The empty space beside me felt pointed somehow. The meal progressed with superficial conversation and compliments on the food. As my mother served her traditional Christmas pudding, a recipe she'd adapted from her British grandmother, my father cleared his throat. Before we finish dessert, there's a family matter we need to discuss. My father's voice cut through the holiday ambiance like a blade. He folded his napkin deliberately and placed it beside his half-eaten pudding. Samantha, this primarily concerns you. The room fell silent. Even the children sensed the shift, their forks pausing mid-air. I straightened my spine, bracing myself for whatever was coming. "We've tried to be understanding," he continued, his tone measuring each word. "But your choices continue to demonstrate a fundamental disconnect from this family's core principles." My mother nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line. "The constant prioritizing of career over family obligations, the values you embrace in Boston, the lifestyle that, well, it's become clear you're on a different path." I looked between them, momentarily speechless. The practiced delivery told me this wasn't spontaneous. They'd rehearsed this speech. "Different path?" I finally managed. "You mean my career? My independence?" Kevin cleared his throat. "Sam, it's more than that. You missed Dad's retirement party for a work conference. You couldn't make it back when Mom needed help after her surgery. You've seen Emma and Jack, what, twice this year?" "I sent money. For a nurse," I countered, feeling heat rise in my cheeks. "I call every Sunday. Money isn't presents," my father interrupted. "Money isn't family." The irony of his statement hung in the air as I thought about the financial documents I'd glimpsed. For people who claimed money wasn't important, they certainly needed mine. Or rather, what they thought would soon be theirs. "What exactly are you saying?" I asked, though I already knew. My mother reached for my father's hand. "We think it would be best if you take some time away from family gatherings, until you've reconsidered your priorities and can demonstrate real commitment to the Mitchell way of life." The Mitchell way of life. As if our family name carried some noble heritage beyond a small-town hardware store and crushing debt they were hiding. "You're asking me to leave? Tonight? On Christmas?" My voice remained level despite the earthquake happening inside me. "You can finish your dessert," my mother offered magnanimously, "and stay tonight as planned. But yes, we think a separation would be best for everyone." I looked at the faces around the table. My father's stern resolution, my mother's practiced concern, Kevin's solemn agreement, Diane's studied neutrality. Only the children looked confused, not understanding why Aunt Sam was being dismissed from the family on Christmas. "And the inheritance?" I asked. "Grandpa's estate, is that part of this separation?" A flicker of surprise crossed my father's face. "The inheritance is set by Harold's will. Your portion is your portion. This isn't about money." But it was. They just didn't know how much. I stood up slowly, placing my own napkin beside my untouched dessert. "I think I'll start packing. Now." I left them sitting at their perfect Christmas table, their perfect family portrait now missing a piece they'd decided was inconvenient. Upstairs, I moved methodically, gathering my belongings from the air mattress on the floor of what had once been my room. I had just zipped my suitcase when a text from Margaret lit up my phone. "Call me when you can. Important update on the trust conditions." Instead of calling, I typed a quick email describing what had just happened, asking her to initiate a hold on all distributions pending review of the family values clause. I attached the voice recording from dinner, a fortunate accident from my still-running dictation app, as evidence. A soft knock interrupted my packing. Kevin didn't wait for permission before entering, his expression a careful mix of concern and determination. "You're overreacting," he said, leaning against the doorframe. "This isn't forever, just until you show some actual commitment to the family." I continued organizing my toiletry bag, not trusting myself to look at him. "And what does commitment look like exactly? Moving back to Westbrook? Taking a job at Dad's store? Marrying someone from the Chamber of Commerce?" He sighed. "Don't be dramatic. It's about being present, contributing, embracing the values that built this family." "Values? Like honesty?" I turned to face him. "Like telling me about the financial problems instead of pretending everything's fine while planning to use Grandpa's money to bail everyone out?" Kevin's expression shifted, surprise quickly masked by defensiveness. "That's different. Everyone's struggling a bit right now." "Everyone except me," I pointed out. Which is probably why I'm suddenly not family enough right when my portion of the inheritance would be useful. That's not fair, he protested, but his eyes slid away from mine. None of this is fair, Kevin, but it is revealing. I zipped my toiletry bag with finality. Tell Mom and Dad I'll be gone by morning. Merry Christmas. After he left, I sat on the edge of the air mattress, my mother's antique music box in my hands. The one thing I'd decided to take that wasn't mine. It had been my grandmother's, then passed to me on my 16th birthday, only to mysteriously migrate back to my mother's dresser after I left for college. I wound it slowly, letting the familiar melody fill the room as I considered my next steps. My phone pinged with Margaret's response. Distribution hold confirmed. The family values clause clearly applies. We should meet as soon as you're back. In Boston. I closed my eyes, relief and resolve washing over me in equal measure. For once, my grandfather's foresight would serve me well. He had seen something in the family dynamics that I'd been too loyal to acknowledge. Now I understood why he'd structured the estate as he had, with me as trustee rather than my father. The most valuable asset in any negotiation is the power to walk away, he'd once told me during a chess game at the cabin. Remember that, Sammy. The moment you need something too badly, you've already lost. My family thought they were dismissing me while keeping access to what they needed. They were about to discover how wrong they were. Morning arrived with a fresh dusting of snow and an emptier feeling in my chest. I'd slept fitfully, waking to the strange dissonance of Christmas decorations surrounding me while the foundation of my family identity had been pulled away. No one was awake yet as I carried my bags downstairs. I left my house key on the entry table, next to a family photo, from which I'd already been symbolically erased. A final glance around the living room, the tree with its coordinated ornaments, the stockings hung precisely on the mantel, the perfect holiday setting that no longer included me. And I stepped out into the cold. The drive back to Boston gave me too much time to think. I cycled through anger, hurt, disbelief, and eventually a strange sense of clarity. By the time I crossed the Massachusetts state line, the emotional storm had settled into something cooler, more calculated. My condo in Beacon Hill welcomed me with silent efficiency. Clean lines, modern furniture, nothing extraneous or sentimental. I designed it as a place of function, not memory. Today, that felt appropriate. I unpacked methodically, then opened my laptop to review the trust documents Margaret had sent months ago. The language was precise, as my grandfather had been in all his business dealings. Distributions to beneficiaries are contingent upon demonstrated adherence to the core Mitchell family values of mutual respect, support of individual growth paths, and recognition of diverse contributions to family strength. As trustee, Samantha Mitchell is empowered to delay or withhold distributions if, in her judgment, these conditions are not being met. At the time, I'd found the clause oddly specific, but assumed it was standard legal language. Now I recognized it as my grandfather's final strategic move in a family dynamic he understood better than I had. 3 days after Christmas, I met Margaret at her office overlooking Boston Harbor. Snow fell steadily outside the windows, muffling the city sounds. "Your grandfather anticipated something like this," she said, sliding a folder across her desk. Not specifically being asked to leave at Christmas dinner, of course, but the underlying tensions, the dismissal of your choices, the privileging of traditional paths over your own. I opened the folder to find handwritten notes from my grandfather, dated 2 years before his death. David and Patricia show concerning rigidity toward Samantha's career. Kevin follows their lead. Legacy planning must account for potential family. Fracture. "Did he tell you why he chose me as trustee?" I asked. Margaret nodded. "He said you were the only one who understood that love and respect can't be conditional. The only one who wouldn't use money as a weapon." I raised an eyebrow. "And yet here we are. Here we are, she agreed. But there's a difference between using money as a weapon and using it as a shield. Your family is weaponizing exclusion. You're simply enforcing the conditions Harold established to protect all of you, including you. She outlined the next steps: formal notification to all beneficiaries about the hold, documentation of the Christmas incident as violation of the Family Values Clause, and a proposed remediation path. "What does remediation look like?" I asked. "That's largely up to you," Margaret replied. "But it should be something measurable, reasonable, and directly addressing the violation." I considered this as I watched the snow accumulate on the window ledge. A formal acknowledgement of wrongdoing, a commitment to family counseling, and a signed agreement to respect individual life choices going forward. Margaret made notes. "And a timeline? 30 days to agree to terms. After that, I'll consider more dramatic steps." She looked up, such as reallocation of distributions, according to Section 4. 3. I'd studied the document carefully. My grandfather had included a provision allowing the trustee to redirect up to 40% of any beneficiary's share to the scholarship fund in cases of sustained violation of family values. Margaret's eyes widened slightly. Harold would be proud. You really did inherit his strategic mind. The formal letters went out on New Year's Eve, a fitting end to a year that had redefined my understanding of family. I didn't celebrate the holiday, instead spending the evening finalizing my first quarter projections for work, finding comfort in the clarity of numbers and the predictability of financial models. I didn't expect an immediate response, but my phone rang at 11:42 p.m., my father's name flashing on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. The message was brief, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Samantha, call me immediately. This game you're playing with your grandfather's money is completely unacceptable." Game. As if protecting myself from their rejection while enforcing my grandfather's wishes was merely a tactical move in some trivial competition. The calls continued through New Year's Day. My father, my mother, twice from Kevin. I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I forwarded each voicemail to Margaret as further documentation of their approach. Demands rather than reflection. Anger instead of understanding. On January 3rd, I received a formal email from my father, copied to the family lawyer. "We are in receipt of your notice regarding Harold Mitchell's estate. Your interpretation of the Family Values Clause is both self-serving and vindictive. The temporary family separation suggested at Christmas was for your own benefit, to help you reconnect with core values you've clearly lost sight of. Using your position as trustee to retaliate is exactly why we're concerned about your judgment. We expect immediate release of the funds as originally scheduled." I forwarded it to Margaret without comment. Her response came within the hour. Perfect example of the behavior Harold was concerned about. They're still not getting it, are they? Days passed without further communication. I threw myself into work, finding unexpected focus in the aftermath of familial rejection. My team noticed the change: the longer hours, the heightened attention to detail, the absence of personal calls during the day. My director even commented on my impressive start to the quarter during our weekly review. On January 12th, I received an unexpected visitor at my condo. The security desk called up to announce that Kevin Mitchell was in the lobby, insisting on seeing me. I considered refusing, then decided it might be useful to hear what emissary role my brother had assigned himself. "Send him up." Kevin looked out of place in my sleek, modern living room, his casual flannel and jeans at odds with the minimalist furniture and monochromatic color scheme. He declined my offer of coffee, pacing instead by the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. "This has gone far enough, Sam," he began without preamble. "Dad's blood pressure is through the roof. Mom can't sleep. The bank is asking questions about the bridge loan they took out against the expected inheritance." I sat calmly on my white, leather sofa, legs crossed. "I'm sorry to hear they're experiencing stress." "You don't look sorry," he shot back. "You look exactly like Grandpa did when he was closing in on a business deal." I couldn't help the small smile that tugged at my lips. "Thank you." Kevin ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "This isn't a compliment. You're destroying the family over what? Some hurt feelings at Christmas? A room full of storage boxes instead of a guest bed? Grow up, Sam." "Interesting choice of words," I replied evenly. "Grandpa's trust doesn't mention anything about hurt feelings. It specifically references mutual respect, support of individual choices, and recognition of diverse contributions." "Did you actually read the documents Margaret sent? Or did you just skim for dollar amounts?" "Don't lawyer me," he snapped. "We both know what this is really about. You're punishing us because we finally called you out on your self-centered lifestyle." I stood, moving to the kitchen island to put physical space between us. His characterization stung, but also confirmed what I'd begun to suspect. They genuinely believed their assessment of my life was objective truth, not their subjective judgment. "Kevin, I'm not punishing anyone. I'm enforcing the conditions Grandpa established. He valued individual paths and growth, something I've only realized recently was unique to him in this family." "So what do you want?" he demanded. "An apology? Fine. I'm sorry we hurt your feelings at Christmas. There, now release the money." I shook my head. "That's not how this works." The formal letter outlined the steps for remediation, family counseling, a signed agreement regarding respect for individual choices, acknowledgement that financial support cannot be contingent on conformity. "That's ridiculous," he scoffed. "We're not sitting through therapy because you're sensitive." "Then you're not getting the money," I replied simply. "It's not my rule, Kevin. It's Grandpa's, and he put me in charge of enforcing it precisely because he foresaw this scenario." Kevin stared at me, a new understanding dawning in his eyes. "You've changed, Sam. Boston changed you. You used to be part of this family." "I'm exactly who I've always been," I countered. "The difference is I'm no longer apologizing for it." After Kevin left, I stood at my window watching snow fall on the city I'd chosen, the life I'd built without their approval or support. For the first time since Christmas, I felt something beyond hurt or vindication. I felt free. The constant background hum of seeking their approval, of justifying my choices, of managing their disappointment had finally gone silent. 2 days later, my mother called. Unlike the previous attempts, her voice wasn't angry, but tearful. "Samantha, please. You've made your point. We shouldn't have asked you to leave on Christmas. It was poorly timed and poorly phrased. But you have to understand our concerns. You've drifted so far from everything we taught you." I let her continue, not interrupting as she cycled through justifications, appeals to family loyalty, and finally the truth. "The bank is threatening to call our loan. Your father's store is barely staying afloat. Kevin's business expansion is on hold. We need that. Money, Samantha. Whatever your feelings about our parenting, do you really want to see everything your grandfather built crumble?" There it was, the core issue. Not my life choices, not family values, but financial desperation dressed up as moral concern. "Mom," I said gently when she paused for breath. "Grandpa appointed me trustee because he trusted my judgment. He included specific conditions about mutual respect and supporting diverse paths. I'm honoring his wishes by enforcing those conditions." "He wouldn't want us to lose everything," she insisted. "No, he wouldn't," I agreed. Which is why the remediation plan includes financial counseling as well as family therapy. He wanted his legacy to support the family, not enable financial mismanagement. The silence on the other end stretched long enough that I checked to see if the call had dropped. Finally, she spoke, her voice smaller. "Your father won't like this." "I know," I acknowledged. "But if it helps, this isn't punishment. It's protection, for all of us. including you and Dad. January turned to February. Snow piled against Boston buildings while I waited for my family to make their decision. Work kept me busy during the day, but evenings stretched long and quiet in my condo. I found myself remembering holidays from childhood, before the divisions had become so pronounced. My father teaching me to use a drill. My mother's delight when I memorized multiplication tables ahead of my class. Even Kevin's hero worship, when I was still his cool older sister rather than his urban-dwelling disappointment. Had we ever truly been the united family they now claimed to champion? Or had harmony always depended on compliance with their vision? Margaret called on February 10th with news. They've agreed to the terms, all of them: family therapy, financial, counseling, the signed agreement about respecting diverse paths, even the public acknowledgement. I sat down on my couch, surprisingly unsteady. Why now? What changed? Reality caught up, she said simply. The bank formally denied their loan extension yesterday. Your father's store supplier put them on credit hold. And apparently Kevin's wife is expecting another baby. They need stability. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt a complex mixture of vindication and sadness. So it wasn't about understanding or respect. It was about necessity. Often is, Margaret replied. But that doesn't mean growth can't happen anyway. Your grandfather used to say, people do the right thing for the wrong reasons all the time. Judge the action, not the motivation. I smiled despite myself. That sounded exactly like him. When will they sign? Tomorrow afternoon. I've arranged for a neutral location, conference room at the Westbrook Community Bank. Will you attend? I considered the question carefully. My presence would make the signing real, force them to face me rather than just the documents. But it would also be an opportunity to begin whatever new relationship might be possible. Yes, I decided. I'll be there. The conference room at Westbrook Community Bank was aggressively bland. Beige walls, outdated landscape prints, a long, mahogany table that had seen better decades. I arrived 15 minutes early, setting my briefcase on the table and checking my reflection in the darkened window. Professional attire, minimal makeup, hair pulled back, the financial analyst, not the rejected daughter. Margaret arrived next, nodding approvingly at my composure. They're in the lobby, she murmured. Your father almost turned around when he saw your car. I took a steadying breath. But he didn't. No, she agreed. Progress. They entered, as a unit, my father first, jaw set, my mother next, eyes downcast. Kevin bringing up the rear, his expression unreadable. They took seats opposite me, the physical embodiment of the division that had been growing for years. Margaret handled the formalities, explaining each document, the conditions for releasing the funds, the schedule for therapy and financial counseling. No one interrupted. The only sounds were the shuffling of papers and the occasional squeak of chairs. When it came time to sign, my father hesitated, pen hovering above the page. This feels like blackmail, he said, not looking at me. It's a condition of inheritance, Margaret corrected gently. One established by Harold, not Samantha. She's simply fulfilling her fiduciary responsibility as trustee. By holding our financial future hostage, Kevin muttered. I met his gaze steadily. By ensuring Grandpa's money doesn't disappear into debts without addressing the underlying issues. He wanted his legacy to strengthen the family, not enable its dysfunction. My mother looked up for the first time. Is that what you think we are? Dysfunctional? I think we stopped seeing each other clearly a long time ago, I replied honestly. You see my independence as rejection. I see your traditionalism as judgment. Grandpa saw it all and tried to create a path toward healing. My father's pen remained suspended, and you get to control that path. Not forever, I said. Once the conditions are met, the distributions proceed as planned. My role as enforcer ends. Something in my tone must have reached him, because he finally lowered the pen to the paper, signing with the deliberate strokes I remembered from childhood permission slips. My mother followed, her signature more hesitant. Kevin signed last, almost aggressively, as if the paper had personally offended him. With the documents complete, Margaret gathered them efficiently, promising to file everything by end of day. A week later, the first limited distribution would be released, enough to address the immediate financial pressures, with the remainder staged alongside progress in therapy. As we prepared to leave, an awkward silence fell over the room. We were no longer in active conflict, but neither were we reconciled. We existed in a new, undefined space somewhere between estrangement and connection. My mother broke the silence first. "Will you come to dinner? Not today, but sometime?" The invitation hung in the air, tentative and fragile. Not a demand. Or a test, but a genuine question. "I'd like that," I said carefully. "After our first therapy session, perhaps." She nodded, relief evident in the loosening of her shoulders. "I'll make that baked ziti you used to like." It was a small thing, this acknowledgement of a preference from my youth. But it represented something crucial, a willingness to see me as an individual with my own tastes and history, not just a disappointing deviation from their plan. As we walked to the parking lot, my father fell into step beside me, his silence thoughtful rather than angry. "Your grandfather would be proud," he finally said as we reached my car. "Not of the circumstances, but of how you've handled them. You're more like him than I realized." Coming from my father, this was as close to an apology as I was likely to get, at least for now. "Thank you," I said simply. "I think he'd be proud of today, of all of us." My father nodded once, then turned toward his own vehicle where my mother waited. Kevin lingered by his truck, watching our exchange with an expression I couldn't quite read. As I drove back to Boston that evening, snow began to fall again. Soft flakes illuminated in my headlights. The family I'd left behind was not suddenly healed or transformed. The wound of Christmas dinner had not magically disappeared. The years of subtle dismissal and conditional acceptance remained part of our shared history. But something had shifted. A power balance had been recalibrated. A truth had been spoken. And perhaps most importantly, my grandfather's final lesson was being learned. That family, true family, cannot be premised on conformity or conditional approval. The trustees' meeting had been just the beginning. The harder work of rebuilding, relationships on more authentic terms, still lay ahead. But for the first time since that devastating Christmas dinner, I felt a cautious hope that something new and stronger might emerge from the ashes of what had been lost. The $680,000 inheritance had never been about the money. It had been my grandfather's final strategic move in a family chess game he'd observed for decades, placing me in a position to demand the respect and recognition he knew I deserved. Not through force or ultimatums, but through the power of walking away from conditional love while holding the key to what they needed. As Boston's skyline appeared on the horizon, I silently thanked my grandfather for his foresight. He couldn't have known exactly how things would unfold, but he'd recognized the patterns and prepared accordingly. He'd given me not just financial leverage, but the courage to use it for healing rather than revenge. Tomorrow would bring the first distributions. Next week, our first therapy session. The path forward remained uncertain, filled with difficult conversations and uncomfortable truths. But for the first time in my adult life, I would be walking that path not as the family disappointment seeking approval, but as an equal participant with a voice that could no longer be dismissed. Sometimes being excluded from a family dinner can be the beginning of inclusion on your own terms. Sometimes losing what you thought was home leads you to build something more authentic in its place. And sometimes, the most powerful inheritance isn't money at all. It's the courage to stand firmly in your truth, even when those who should love you unconditionally try to make that love contingent on becoming someone you're not. 3 weeks. After implementing the distribution hold, the first formal response arrived from my family. Not a phone call or an emotional plea, but a certified letter on the stationery of Wilson & Associates, a law firm I'd never heard of. I traced my finger along the embossed letterhead, momentarily impressed that my parents had reached beyond. Westbrook for legal representation. The letter itself was coldly professional, challenging the validity of the family values clause and my authority to interpret it. It claimed the Christmas dinner incident had been misconstrued and taken out of context, framing their actions as parental guidance rather than rejection. Most tellingly, it requested immediate release of the funds due to unforeseen financial exigencies facing the beneficiaries. I forwarded a scan to Margaret with a simple question. Should I be concerned? Her response came within the hour. Not even slightly. This is standard posturing. The clause is ironclad. Harold had me review it with 3 different estate specialists before finalizing. What's interesting is their approach. Hiring outside counsel suggests they're trying to intimidate rather than understand. The intimidation continued. 2 days later, I received a voicemail from attorney James Wilson himself, his tone managing to be simultaneously cordial and threatening. Ms. Mitchell, I strongly suggest we discuss this matter before positions become entrenched. Family disputes are always regrettable, but when substantial assets are involved, they can become particularly unpleasant. I'm sure none of us want this. To escalate further, I sat at my kitchen island, replaying the message twice. The subtle menace beneath the professional veneer was unmistakable. But something else caught my attention. A faint familiarity in the cadence, the particular way. He emphasized certain syllables. A quick internet search confirmed my suspicion. James Wilson, founding partner of Wilson & Associates, was married to Ellen Wilson, née Patterson, my mother's cousin. Another small-town connection leveraged against me. Another attempt to tip. The scales through familiarity rather than merit. I drafted a response with Margaret's guidance, formal, unyielding, and focused entirely on the trust conditions rather than emotional aspects. We attached the audio recording from Christmas dinner, transcribed for clarity, alongside the relevant trust clauses. My final paragraph was direct. The remediation path has been clearly outlined. Family counseling, financial planning assistance, a formal acknowledgement of inappropriate behavior. These conditions are not punitive, but restorative, designed to ensure grandfather's legacy strengthens family bonds rather than enables dysfunctional patterns. The timeline remains 30 days from original notification. The responding email came not from Attorney Wilson, but from my father directly, suggesting their legal strategy had already hit a wall. His message was brief but revealing. Samantha, this has gone far enough. Your mother hasn't slept properly since Christmas. The bank is asking questions we can't answer. Kevin's business expansion is on indefinite hold. Whatever point you're trying to make, consider it made. Release the funds now, and perhaps we can discuss your concerns at a more appropriate time. Still no acknowledgement. Still positioning my response as petty retaliation rather than enforcement of legitimate conditions. Still prioritizing their financial needs over addressing the underlying issues. I didn't reply. February arrived with a historic blizzard that shut down Boston for 3 days. From my condo windows, I watched the city disappear under swirling white, streets emptying, as residents heeded warnings to stay inside. The enforced isolation mirrored my emotional state. Contained, self-sufficient, separated from previous connections, yet somehow more clear-sighted for it. During those snowbound days, I found myself drawing parallels between the weather and my family situation. The blizzard, like their rejection, had appeared suddenly but was likely building for longer than I'd noticed. The isolation, while difficult, provided space for reflection and assessment. And eventually, inevitably, the storm would pass, leaving a transformed landscape that would require new navigation skills. On the third day, as plows finally began to clear main thoroughfares, my phone rang with Kevin's number. I almost declined, but decided direct engagement might yield insights that formal communications couldn't. Sam. His voice sounded tired, the confident swagger replaced by something heavier. We need to talk. We are talking, I replied, keeping my tone neutral. He sighed. Not like this, face to face. Can I come to Boston? I hesitated, weighing the potential benefits against possible manipulation. What would this conversation accomplish that letters haven't? Letters don't let you see someone's eyes, he said simply. Dad's not handling this well. His blood pressure's through the roof. The store might not make payroll next month, and he paused. You should know they're discussing more aggressive options. Meaning? Contesting the trust, challenging your fitness as trustee, claiming undue influence by Grandpa's attorney. He lowered his voice, though presumably no one was listening. It would be messy, Sam. For everyone. I moved to my window, watching snowplows push mounds of white into growing towers at street corners. That sounds like a threat, Kevin. It's reality, he countered. I'm trying to prevent something that would damage this family permanently. Just let me come to Boston, hear me out, then decide. I agreed to meet at a neutral location, a cafe near the public garden known for its discretion and well-spaced tables. The following Saturday, I arrived early, selecting a corner table with clear sightlines to the door and exit. Professional habit, perhaps, or newly developed self-protection instincts. Kevin appeared exactly on time, stomping snow from his boots at the entrance. He'd lost weight since Christmas, his usually robust frame appearing slightly diminished in his heavy winter coat. As he approached my table, I noticed the dark circles under his eyes, the tightness around his mouth. Thanks for meeting, he said, sliding into the chair across from me. He declined coffee, asking instead for water. Another small deviation from his usual patterns. You wanted to talk, I prompted after the server left. I'm listening. Kevin's hands fidgeted with his water glass, another uncharacteristic sign of discomfort. Look, this situation is spiraling. Dad's consulting with 3 different lawyers now. Mom's starting to blame herself for everything, barely getting out of bed some days. The hardware store's supplier put us on credit hold. My business loan application was denied when I couldn't verify the incoming capital from Grandpa's estate. I absorbed this information without visible reaction, though internally I noted the escalating consequences of their actions. These sound like serious challenges, but I don't hear anything addressing the actual conditions for releasing the funds. Kevin leaned forward, voice lowering. That's what I'm trying to tell you. They're not going to meet your conditions. Pride, stubbornness, fear of admitting fault, whatever you want to call it. They're digging in. And if that means a legal battle that drains the very inheritance they're fighting for, they seem prepared to do it. That would be irrational, I observed. Family rarely operates on pure logic, Sam. You know that. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so reminiscent of our father that I nearly flinched. Which is why I'm here with a compromise. I raised an eyebrow, waiting. I'll meet the conditions, he continued. Family counseling, financial planning, formal acknowledgement, all of it. Me and Diane, not Mom and Dad. If I comply with everything you've outlined, would you consider releasing at least my portion of the inheritance? The request caught me off guard. In all our planning, Margaret and I had treated the family as a unit, not considered individual compliance as an option. It was an interesting strategic move, attempting to fracture the united front I'd been facing. Why would you do that? I asked, genuinely curious. You were fully aligned with them at Christmas. Kevin's expression shifted, something vulnerable breaking through his usual confidence. Because Diane's pregnant again. Because my agency needs the capital infusion I promised based on the inheritance. Because... He hesitated. Because maybe you were right about some things. I studied him, searching for signs of manipulation or insincerity. Finding none, I still maintained caution. What things, specifically? The way they've always had one standard for me and another for you. The way they talk about your choices like they're personal slights against them. He shrugged uncomfortably. I've been thinking about what it must feel like, being told you're not welcome at Christmas dinner after flying in to see family. It was wrong, Sam. I should have said something then. His admission wasn't full accountability, but it was more self-awareness than I'd expected. Have you shared these thoughts with Mom and Dad? Tried to. Dad shut it down. Said I was being manipulated by you. A wry smile crossed his face. As if you've ever been able to manipulate me into anything since we were kids. Despite myself, I returned the smile, remembering countless childhood standoffs between us. You were the most stubborn 8-year-old alive. Still am, apparently. He took a sip of water. So, is it possible? Individual compliance? Individual distribution? I considered the question carefully. I don't know. I'd need to review the trust language with Margaret. The clauses might be structured for collective rather than individual adherence. But you'll look into it? He pressed. This could be a way forward, Sam. Maybe Mom and Dad follow eventually. Maybe they don't. But it breaks the standoff. I nodded slowly. I'll discuss it with Margaret. No promises. Relief flooded his features. Thank you. That's all I'm asking. As he prepared to leave, Kevin hesitated, then reached across the table, covering my hand briefly with his. For what it's worth, I miss you. The kids ask about you. Emma wanted to know if Aunt Sam was mad at her. The mention of my niece sent an unexpected pang through my chest. Tell her I'm not mad at her, not at all. Will do. He stood, adjusting his scarf against the February chill. One more thing you should know. Dad's been talking to Uncle Richard about the cabin. My grandfather's fishing cabin in the Poconos, the place where he'd taught me to tie flies and read star patterns. The property I'd assumed was part of the General Estate. The cabin wasn't included in the trust documentation, I said, confused. Kevin nodded. That's the point. Apparently, Grandpa left it to you directly in his will, separate from the trust. Dad's trying to challenge that too, claiming Grandpa wasn't of sound mind when he made that decision. I absorbed this new information, another layer to the situation I hadn't anticipated. Thank you for telling me. Family shouldn't keep secrets, he said simply, then turned to leave, disappearing into the swirl of snow beyond the cafe windows. That evening, I called Margaret to discuss Kevin's proposal and the new information about the cabin. Individual. Compliance is theoretically possible, she confirmed after reviewing the documents. The trust language focuses on beneficiaries meeting conditions, not specifically requiring all of them to comply simultaneously. It's an interesting approach, not what Harold anticipated, but not explicitly prevented either. And the cabin? I asked. Ah, yes. I could hear papers shuffling on her end. Your grandfather was very specific about that property. He left it to you directly, outside the trust, with a separate title transfer that completed immediately upon his death. It's already legally yours, Samantha. Your father has no standing to challenge it. In fact, more shuffling, I have the deed right here, waiting for you to record it with the county. I sat back, momentarily stunned. He never told me. He wanted it to be a surprise, I think. Said it was the place where you truly connected, where he saw the real you emerge beyond family expectations. A memory surfaced, my grandfather and I sitting on the cabin's dock at sunrise, fishing lines cast into still water. I'd just been rejected from an internship I desperately wanted, feeling like a failure as I compared myself to classmates with family connections and prestigious pedigrees. The world rewards two types of people, he'd said quietly. those who make the most noise, and those who know which currents run deepest. Your parents never understood that you're the second type, but I do. How should we proceed? I asked, Margaret, returning to the present moment. With caution, she advised. If we allow Kevin's individual compliance to release his portion, it creates both opportunity and risk. It might encourage your parents to follow suit eventually, or it might harden their position if they see it as you and Kevin aligning against them. And the cabin? Record the deed immediately. Your father can't legally challenge a completed transfer, but he might try other approaches if he realizes you know about it. I thanked her and promised to consider the options carefully. After we hung up, I found myself scrolling through old photos on my phone. Family gatherings from years past, holiday dinners, summer barbecues. In every image, the same pattern emerged. My parents and Kevin clustered together, me slightly separated, as if the camera had instinctively captured the emotional reality beneath the posed smiles. Had it always been this way? Had I simply accepted the subtle exclusion as normal, adjusting my expectations accordingly? Or had the distance grown so gradually that I'd failed to notice until the Christmas dinner ultimatum had made it explicit? The questions lingered as I made my decision. The next morning, I emailed Margaret with clear instructions. We would accept Kevin's individual compliance proposal, releasing his portion of the inheritance once he completed the outlined steps. Additionally, I would record the cabin deed immediately, establishing clear ownership before my father could take further action. Events moved quickly after that. Kevin scheduled his first counseling session, enrolled in the financial planning program, and drafted a formal acknowledgement of his role in the Christmas dinner incident. True to his word, he was addressing all conditions methodically, showing the same determination in remediation that he'd previously directed toward the family business. My father, predictably, reacted with anger when informed of the individual compliance option. His email was curt. Dividing the family further proves you've never understood what we tried to teach you. This manipulation of your brother won't be forgotten. My mother's response came separately, her message tinged with something closer to confusion than rage. I don't understand how things reached this point. We only wanted what was best for you, what would bring you back to the values you were raised with. Now you're turning Kevin against us too. I didn't respond to either message directly. Instead, I focused on practical matters, recording the cabin deed, reviewing Kevin's progress reports from counseling, preparing for the first limited distribution once he completed the requirements. March arrived with warming temperatures and the first hints of spring. As snow receded from Boston streets, I found my professional momentum building simultaneously. A significant client expansion, praise from senior leadership, even a mention in a financial industry publication as a rising star to watch. Success that would once have felt hollow without my family's acknowledgement now stood on its own merit. I wasn't seeking their approval, wasn't measuring my achievements against their expectations. The liberation in that realization was profound, if bittersweet. Kevin completed his compliance requirements by mid-March. The counselor's report noted his genuine engagement and meaningful insights regarding family dynamics. The financial planner confirmed his completion of the basic program, with recommendations for ongoing consultation. His formal acknowledgement, while clearly uncomfortable for him to write, addressed both his active participation in the Christmas rejection and his failure to intervene when he recognized the situation was wrong. Following the trust provisions, I authorized release of his portion, $170,000, on March 20th. The transfer went through without technical issues, though the psychological impact rippled immediately through the family system. Diane called to express tearful gratitude, explaining that the funds would allow them to complete their home addition before the new baby arrived in August. Kevin texted a simple, "Thank you, means more than you know." My parents maintained pointed silence, their absence of response communicating more than words could have. Then, just as the situation seemed to be stabilizing, an unexpected development. An invitation arrived by mail, handwritten on cream stationery. Emma's 8th birthday party, scheduled for the first weekend in April at my parents' home. The invitation wasn't signed, offering no clue whether it came with my parents' blessing or was sent by Kevin and Diane without their knowledge. I turned the card over in my hands, uncertain how to respond. Attending would inevitably create tension if my parents weren't genuinely on board. Declining would disappoint Emma and potentially damage my reconnection with Kevin's family. The timing felt deliberate, forcing a decision before the dust had settled on the inheritance situation. After careful consideration, I called Diane directly, bypassing potential intermediaries. The invitation, I began without preamble. Was it cleared with my parents? Diane hesitated, then sighed. Not exactly. Kevin told them he was inviting you and they didn't explicitly object. But they didn't enthusiastically approve either. So I'd be walking into an ambush, I concluded. No, not that. Her voice softened. Emma really wants you there. She's been asking about you for months. And I think your parents don't know how to bridge the gap they created. Maybe this is a first step, even if they can't initiate it themselves. I considered this perspective. What does Kevin think? He thinks families heal through small moments more than grand gestures. Birthday cake with an 8-year-old might accomplish what formal letters and legal maneuvers can't. The wisdom in that approach resonated with me. Perhaps the path forward wasn't through confrontation or continued separation, but through these side doors of ordinary family moments. Tell Emma I wouldn't miss it, I said finally. April 5th dawned clear and mild as I drove the familiar route to Westbrook, my stomach nodding with each passing mile. In the passenger seat, a carefully wrapped gift for Emma, a telescope I'd researched extensively, remembering my own childhood fascination with the night sky. Beside it, a smaller package containing the deed to the Poconos cabin, now officially recorded in my name. I wasn't planning a confrontation about the cabin, but I wanted the documentation close at hand in case my father raised the issue. Preparation had always been my default response to uncertainty, a professional habit that served me equally well in personal challenges. The Mitchell family home looked different somehow as I pulled into the driveway, though nothing had physically changed. Perhaps it was my perspective that had shifted, seeing it now as one chapter in my story rather than the defining framework of my identity. Children's voices and music drifted from the backyard. I circled the house rather than entering, through the front door, following the sounds of celebration. The yard had been transformed with balloons and streamers. A cluster of children gathered around what appeared to be a science demonstration, led by a woman in a lab coat. Diane spotted me first, waving from where she stood by the refreshment table. Kevin looked up from his grill duties, offered a quick smile, then returned to flipping burgers with studied concentration. My mother, arranging cupcakes nearby, froze momentarily when she saw me, her hands suspended in mid-motion. And then Emma herself, spotting me from the midst of her friends, broke away with a shriek of delight. "Aunt Sam, you came!" She launched herself at me with unrestrained enthusiasm, nearly toppling the gift I carried. "Careful, birthday girl," I laughed, steadying us both. "I brought something that requires gentle handling. Is it breakable? Is it expensive? Is it alive?" Her rapid-fire questions came between bouncing attempts to guess the contents by shaking the package. "Open it and see," I suggested, crouching to her level. "But maybe somewhere a little quieter?" She nodded with exaggerated seriousness, grabbing my hand and pulling me toward the wooden swing set at the yard's edge. "This is our special spot," she informed me solemnly. As Emma unwrapped her gift with meticulous attention to preserving the paper, a Mitchell family tradition I'd forgotten until that moment, I became aware of my father watching from the patio steps. His expression was unreadable, body language stiff, but not overtly hostile. Emma's gasp of delight as she revealed the telescope drew my attention back to her. "It's for star watching, like in my book." "Exactly," I confirmed. "And it has special features to help you find constellations, even track planets." "Can we use it tonight?" Her eyes were wide with excitement. "If it's clear, and if your parents say it's okay," I hedged, glancing toward the adults. "Dad," Emma called, waving Kevin over. "Aunt Sam brought me a telescope. Can we use it tonight after everyone leaves? Please?" Kevin examined the gift with appropriate admiration, asked several questions about its capabilities, then nodded. "Weather's supposed to be perfect. I think a backyard astronomy session sounds like a great end to birthday celebrations." Emma hugged the telescope box, then me, before running to show her friends her newest treasure. Kevin remained, settling onto the swing beside me. "Thanks for coming," he said quietly. "It means a lot to her, to all of us, actually." I nodded, watching Emma proudly displaying the telescope to her audience of fellow 8-year-olds. "How are things?" "Since the distribution, I mean." "Better, financially," he acknowledged. "Emotionally. Complicated. Dad's hurt pride is battling with practical realities. Mom's caught in between. But they're talking about it more openly now, which feels like progress. And you?" He considered the question carefully. "I'm seeing things differently. The counseling helped, honestly. Made me realize how much I've been defining myself by their expectations instead of my own judgment." This admission, from the brother who had always seemed most comfortable in the family system, surprised me. "That's significant, Kevin." "Yeah." He glanced toward our parents, still maintaining their distance by the refreshment table. "They're trying, in their way. Letting you be here without objection is actually huge for them, even if they can't bring themselves to make the first move toward reconciliation." "Small moments," I murmured, remembering Diane's words. "Exactly." He stood as Diane waved him back to grilling duties. "Just be patient with them today? They're still processing everything." The afternoon progressed with an unusual dynamic. Emma serving as my primary connection to the gathering, my parents maintaining civil but distant cordiality. Other guests clearly aware of underlying tensions but politely navigating around them. I helped serve cake, organized a game when the science demonstrator finished her presentation, and generally tried to focus on making the day special for my niece rather than addressing the elephant in the yard. As guests began departing and twilight approached, Emma reminded everyone excitedly about the promised telescope session. Kevin set up folding chairs in a rough circle on the lawn while I assembled the telescope, explaining each component to my enthusiastic apprentice. "Can Grandma and Grandpa watch too?" Emma asked innocently, looking between me and my parents, who had been clearing away party debris at a careful distance. The question created a moment of suspended tension. My mother looked to my father, who hesitated before nodding stiffly. "If there's room." "Always room for stargazers," I responded lightly, continuing the telescope assembly as if the exchange were perfectly normal. As darkness deepened and stars emerged, an unlikely group gathered on the lawn. Emma and her younger brother Jack, Kevin and Diane, my parents, and me. I oriented the telescope toward the emerging celestial patterns, explaining to Emma how to use the star chart that had come with her gift. "See that bright one?" I pointed upward. "That's actually Jupiter. And if we point the telescope just right." I adjusted the instrument carefully, then stepped back. "Take a look." Emma's gasp of wonder as she glimpsed the planet and its moons echoed across the quiet yard. "It has rings, like Saturn." "Actually, those are its largest moons," I corrected, gently. "You can see 4 of them tonight." One by one, Each family member took turns at the eyepiece, exclamations of surprise coming even from my father when the details of the distant world came into focus. As I helped Jack take his turn, I noticed my mother standing slightly apart, arms wrapped around herself against the evening chill. Without overthinking the gesture, I removed my cardigan and approached her, offering it silently. She hesitated, then accepted with a small nod. "Emma loves the telescope," she said softly, the first direct words she'd spoken to me all day. "I remembered how much I loved looking at stars with Grandpa," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "At the cabin." My mother tensed slightly at the mention of the property but didn't retreat. "He always said you had an eye for patterns others missed." "He taught me that," I acknowledged, gazing upward at the familiar constellations. "To look beyond the obvious, find the connections that matter." We stood in silence for several moments, watching as Kevin helped Emma locate another celestial target. When my mother spoke again, her voice carried a vulnerability I rarely associated with her. "We made mistakes, Samantha. At Christmas. Before that too, probably." It wasn't a full apology, wasn't an explicit acknowledgement of all the issues between us. But from a woman who had rarely admitted error in my lifetime, it represented a significant step. "Yes," I agreed simply. "We all have." She nodded, pulling my cardigan closer around her shoulders. "Your grandfather would have loved seeing Emma with that telescope. He always said knowledge was the best gift." "He did say that." I smiled slightly at the memory. "He also said family was complicated but worth the effort." My mother's eyes remained on the stars above. "Wise man." "Very," I agreed. We continued watching as Emma excitedly discovered new celestial objects, her enthusiasm drawing even my father into the shared experience. Nothing was resolved, not fully. The trust distributions for my parents remained on hold. The holiday rejection had not been formally addressed. Years of conditional acceptance and subtle undermining still lingered beneath the surface. But standing there under the vast canopy of stars, I felt something shift. Not a dramatic reconciliation, but a small opening, a possibility that hadn't existed before. My grandfather had understood something fundamental about family healing that I was only beginning to grasp. Sometimes the path forward isn't through confrontation or legal maneuvers or even explicit accountability, but through these shared moments of wonder that remind us of our common humanity. The telescope Emma now cherished would likely gather dust on a shelf eventually, as childhood gifts often do. But perhaps this night of stars, this momentary truce in a family Cold War, might plant seeds for something more enduring. Not a return to what was. I had no interest in resuming my role as the family disappointment, but the beginning of something new, something based on mutual respect rather than conformity. As Jupiter tracked across the night sky, I made no promises, offered no concessions about the inheritance. That would come later, through proper channels, with appropriate safeguards. But I did accept a tentative invitation to Sunday dinner the following weekend, a small step toward whatever new relationship might be possible. Family healing, like stargazing, requires both patience and perspective, the ability to see both individual points of light and the larger patterns they form together. That night, beneath the ancient light of distant stars, we weren't trustee and beneficiaries, weren't judge and defendants. We were simply people connected by blood and history, momentarily united by an 8-year-old's wonder at the universe beyond our small human concerns. The morning after Emma's birthday party, I woke in my hotel room with mixed emotions. The evening stargazing had created a tentative bridge, not strong enough to bear the weight of all our history, but a starting point nonetheless. I checked my phone to find a text from Kevin. "Thanks again for coming. Emma slept with the telescope by her bed." I smiled despite myself, then noticed an email notification from Margaret. The subject line was simple: "Updates, Important. I opened it immediately. Samantha, 2 developments you should know about. First, your father attempted to list the cabin for sale yesterday with Lakeview Realty. The agent, fortunately, ran a title search and discovered it's in your name. Second, I received a call from Attorney Wilson requesting a settlement conference. I believe your attendance at Emma's party may have shifted their approach. How would you like to proceed? I considered the implications while ordering room service coffee. My father's attempt to sell property he didn't own was troubling but not surprising. Another move born of desperation rather than principle. The settlement request, however, might signal the beginning of an actual resolution. I replied to Margaret, suggesting we agree to the conference but insist on neutral ground, her office in Boston, and specific parameters including financial disclosure from all parties. While I wasn't opposed to compromise, I wouldn't abandon the core conditions my grandfather had established. Later that morning, as I prepared to check out, another message arrived. This one from my mother, her first direct communication since Christmas. The telescope was thoughtful. Emma hasn't stopped talking about Jupiter's moons. Sunday dinner is at 5 if you're still in town. No mention of the inheritance situation, no acknowledgement of the tension, just a casual invitation as if the past months of legal maneuvers and frozen funds hadn't happened. It was classic Patricia Mitchell, addressing the surface while avoiding the depths. Still, it represented an opening. I texted back, "Can't this Sunday, meeting with Margaret in Boston, perhaps next weekend." Her response came almost immediately. "We'll set a place for you." I drove back to Boston with the sense of standing at a crossroads. The professional in me wanted clear terms, formal agreements, explicit accountability. The daughter in me recognized that family healing rarely follows such orderly paths. The settlement conference was scheduled for Wednesday at Margaret's office. I spent the intervening days reviewing trust documents, preparing talking points, and consulting with a family therapist who specialized in inheritance disputes. Dr. Rivera offered a perspective I hadn't fully considered. In these situations, money often serves as a proxy for deeper emotional issues, she explained during our video consultation. Your family's financial desperation is real, but their resistance to meeting conditions isn't just about pride. It's about maintaining the family story they've constructed, where your choices represent rejection of their values rather than pursuit of your own. So how do I break that pattern? I asked. By separating the financial accountability from the emotional reconciliation, she suggested. The trust already provides the financial framework, but the healing may need to happen through a different process altogether. I considered her words, carefully, thinking about Emma's birthday party, about standing with my mother under the stars, about the tiny opening created through my niece's wonder rather than through legal demands. Margaret greeted me in the lobby of her firm's elegant offices on Wednesday morning. "They're already here," she murmured as we rode the elevator. "All 3 of them, plus Attorney Wilson." "3?" I questioned. "Your father, mother, and brother," she clarified. Though Kevin said he's here as a mediator, not formally aligned with either position. I nodded, mentally adjusting my approach. The conference room was designed to impress. Mahogany table, leather chairs, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Boston skyline. My family looked small against this backdrop of corporate power. My father's usually commanding presence diminished in the unfamiliar environment. "Thank you all for coming," Margaret began after introductions. "We're here to discuss potential resolution of the Mitchell family trust distribution issue. As a reminder, the current status is that distributions remain on hold pending compliance with the Family Values Clause, with the exception of Kevin's portion, which was released following his completion of the specified requirements." Attorney Wilson cleared his throat. "My clients are prepared to discuss conditional release of the remaining funds. However, we maintain that the interpretation of the Family Values Clause has been unduly strict and potentially beyond the scope of what Harold Mitchell intended." Interesting perspective, Margaret replied smoothly, considering Harold specifically consulted with me about scenarios exactly like what occurred at Christmas dinner. My father shifted uncomfortably, his face flushing. My mother kept her eyes on her folded hands. Only Kevin met my gaze directly, his expression encouraging. Perhaps we could focus on moving forward rather than debating past interpretations, Attorney Wilson suggested. The Mitchell family proposes a modified compliance program, abbreviated counseling, simplified financial planning, and a joint statement acknowledging miscommunication during the holidays. I listened without interrupting, noting the careful language that avoided any direct admission of wrongdoing. When he finished, all eyes turned to me. "Thank you for the proposal," I said, voice steady. Before responding specifically, I'd like to clarify something. This isn't about punishing anyone or extracting apologies. My grandfather established these conditions because he saw patterns in our family that concerned him, patterns that the Christmas dinner incident unfortunately confirmed. I opened a folder containing the handwritten notes Margaret had shown me months earlier. He wrote these observations 2 years before his death. David and Patricia show concerning rigidity toward Samantha's career. Kevin follows their lead. Legacy planning must account for potential family fracture. My father's expression tightened. "You never mentioned these notes before." "I didn't know they existed until after Christmas," I explained. "Grandpa anticipated exactly what happened. My exclusion from the family based on life choices you disapprove of, and created mechanisms to prevent his money from funding that dynamic." My mother finally looked up. "We never intended to exclude you permanently, Samantha. We were trying to help you find your way back to family values." By telling me not to come home for Christmas? By converting my bedroom to storage before I'd even arrived? By announcing my exile during holiday dinner? The questions weren't angry, just direct. She had no immediate response. Kevin intervened gently. "I think what Mom is trying to say is that their intentions weren't as harsh as their actions appeared. Which doesn't excuse those actions," he added quickly, "but might help us find common ground." Attorney Wilson consulted his notes. "My clients are prepared to attend 3 family counseling sessions, review basic financial planning materials, and issue a statement acknowledging that the Christmas dinner communication was poorly handled." Would these modified steps satisfy the trust conditions? I glanced at Margaret, who gave a slight nod indicating the ball was in my court. Dr. Rivera's advice echoed in my mind. Separate financial accountability from emotional reconciliation. "I appreciate the proposal," I began carefully, "and I'm willing to consider modifications to the original requirements. But first, I need to understand something fundamental. Do you actually recognize that what happened at Christmas dinner was wrong? Not just poorly timed or phrased, but fundamentally wrong?" My father's jaw tightened. "That's not a legal question." "No," I agreed. "It's a family question, and it's at the heart of everything we're discussing." A heavy silence fell over the room. Attorney Wilson looked uncomfortable, clearly preferring contract terms to emotional confrontations. Margaret remained impassive, allowing the moment to unfold. Finally, my mother spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "It was wrong. The timing, the audience, the ultimatum itself." She looked directly at me for the first time. "I've known it since that night. I just didn't know how to take it back without losing face, I suppose." My father stared at her, clearly surprised by this admission. She continued, her voice strengthening. "We've spent so many years convinced we knew what was best for you. When you chose differently, it felt like rejection. But that night, watching you walk away from the table, I realized we were the ones rejecting you, not the other way around." The raw honesty of her words created a shift in the room's atmosphere. My father looked down at his hands, his shoulders slumping slightly. Kevin reached over and squeezed our mother's arm supportively. "Thank you for saying that," I said quietly. "It means more than any formal agreement." From that point, the negotiation took on a different tone, less adversarial, more collaborative. We agreed to a modified program, 4 family counseling sessions, one more than they'd proposed, comprehensive financial planning with quarterly check-ins for a year, and a formal acknowledgement of both the Christmas incident and the pattern of conditional acceptance that had preceded it. "There's one more thing," I added as the terms were being finalized. "The cabin." My father tensed visibly. "What about it?" "I know you tried to list it for sale," I said directly, "even though Grandpa left it to me outside the trust, and the deed is already in my name." He had the grace to look uncomfortable. "We were desperate. The foundation repairs on the house." "I understand the financial pressure," I interrupted, gently. "But attempting to sell property you don't own isn't the answer." "What are you going to do with it?" he asked, a challenge in his tone. "You live in Boston. You'll barely use it." "That's not the point," I replied. "It was Grandpa's gift to me. It matters because of what it represents, the place where he accepted me exactly as I am." My father nodded stiffly but said nothing more. As the meeting concluded with handshakes and signatures on preliminary agreements, I felt a curious lightness. Not the triumph I might have imagined months earlier, but something quieter and ultimately more satisfying. The sense of having honored both my grandfather's intentions and my own boundaries. True to my word, I drove to Westbrook the following Sunday for family dinner. The atmosphere was awkward but not hostile, a family finding its way through unfamiliar terrain without a clear map. My mother had indeed made the baked ziti I'd loved as a teenager. My father attempted stilted questions about my work. Kevin and Diane filled silences with stories about the children. After dinner, as Kevin and Diane left with sleepy kids in tow, I found myself alone with my parents in the kitchen. The moment felt weighted with unspoken words. "Our first counseling session is scheduled for Tuesday," my mother ventured, rinsing a serving dish. "Dr. Levine in Philadelphia." I nodded. "That's good. I've heard she's excellent." "We've also set up the initial financial planning meeting," my father added, his tone suggesting this concession was particularly difficult for him. "Though I still maintain I've managed our finances perfectly well for 40 years. I resisted pointing out the evidence to the contrary. "It's not about criticism, Dad. It's about planning for the future more effectively." He grunted non-committally, but didn't argue. As I prepared to leave, my mother hesitated, then pulled a small box from a kitchen drawer. "I found this when we were clearing out some old things. Thought you might want it back." I opened the box to find my grandmother's cameo brooch, the one she'd left me in her will 12 years earlier, which had somehow migrated to my mother's jewelry box shortly after the funeral. "It should have been yours all along," my mother admitted. I wanted to keep pieces of her close." I studied the delicate ivory carving, remembering my grandmother wearing it on special occasions. "Thank you," I said simply, closing the box carefully. It wasn't an explicit apology for years of small appropriations and boundary crossings, but it was an acknowledgement of sorts, a recognition that certain things rightfully belonged to me, regardless of whether she understood or approved of my choices. The next morning, I visited the cabin before returning to Boston. The small A-frame structure sat nestled among pine trees overlooking the lake, exactly as I remembered it from childhood, summers. I used the key Margaret had given me with the deed, feeling a strange combination of familiarity and newness as I entered. Everything was exactly as my grandfather had left it. Fishing gear organized on shelves, books lining the walls, the ancient telescope still positioned by the window overlooking the water. On the kitchen table stood a carved wooden box I didn't recognize. Inside was a letter in my grandfather's distinctive handwriting, dated just weeks before his death. "Samantha," it began, "if you're reading this, you've claimed your inheritance. Not just the money, though that's important too, but this place, the one spot where I've always seen you shine without constraint or criticism. I've watched you navigate our family's expectations with more grace than we deserved. You adapted and achieved and made us proud, even while something essential in you was being constantly questioned. That stops now. This cabin is yours because you're the only one who truly understood what makes it special, not its market value or location, but the freedom it represents. The trust arrangements may seem complicated, but they have a simple purpose: to ensure that my legacy supports growth rather than control. You are the most Mitchell-like of all my descendants, though your parents would be shocked to hear it. You have the determination, the vision, and the courage that built everything we have. Never let anyone convince you that following your own path makes you less a part of this family. If anything, it makes you more. All my love, Grandpa. I sat with the letter for a long time, watching sunlight dance across the lake's surface. The emotions it stirred were complex: gratitude for his understanding, sadness that he'd seen the family dynamics so clearly, determination to honor his faith in me. The inheritance had never been primarily about money. The $680,000 was substantial, yes, but the true value lay in what it had revealed and potentially healed. My grandfather had created a mechanism that forced long overdue conversations, challenged entrenched patterns, and ultimately provided a path toward a more authentic family relationship. Over the following months, the trust conditions were gradually fulfilled. My parents attended all 4 counseling sessions, worked diligently with the financial planner, and signed the formal acknowledgement we'd drafted together. The remaining funds were released in stages as each requirement was completed. My father used his portion to pay off the house foundation repairs and invest in modernizing the hardware store's inventory system. My mother created a modest retirement fund to supplement their Social Security. The scholarship portion went to the community college as planned, establishing the Harold Mitchell Educational Opportunity Fund. The counseling sessions revealed patterns none of us had fully articulated before. My parents' fear that my different choices somehow invalidated theirs. My brother's resentment of expectations that fell solely on him when I left. My own defensive independence that sometimes prevented genuine connection. We didn't resolve every issue, but we developed tools for discussing differences without retreating to old positions. I began visiting Westbrook monthly, rather than just on major holidays. Not out of obligation, but from a genuine desire to build a new kind of relationship with my family. One based on mutual respect, rather than conditional approval. Sometimes these visits were tense, old patterns threatening to resurface. Sometimes they were surprisingly easy, moments of connection emerging in unexpected ways. I also invited them to Boston, showing them the world I'd built there. My office overlooking the harbor, my favorite restaurants, the community garden where I volunteered on weekends. Seeing me in my chosen environment helped them understand that my life wasn't a rejection of theirs, just a different expression of shared underlying values. Work ethic, community involvement, personal integrity. The cabin became a special meeting place. I spent several weekends renovating it, maintaining its rustic character while updating essentials like the heating system and kitchen appliances. That summer, I invited Emma and Jack for a week of Aunt Sam's science camp, teaching them to fish in the mornings and stargaze at night, just as my grandfather had done for me. One evening in late August, as I sat on the cabin's dock watching the sunset, my father appeared unexpectedly, walking down the path from where he'd parked his truck. "Hope I'm not intruding," he said, uncharacteristically hesitant. "Your mother mentioned you were up here this weekend." "Not intruding at all," I replied, gesturing to the adjacent chair. "Beautiful evening." He sat beside me, both of us falling into companionable silence as the sky transformed from blue to pink to deep orange. It reminded me of similar evenings. With my grandfather, the quiet punctuated only by the occasional loon call or fish jumping. "I owe you an apology," my father said finally, still looking out over the water. A real one, not the formal statement we signed. I waited, giving him space to continue. I've been thinking about it a lot during these counseling sessions. About why your choices bothered me so much. He picked up a small stone, turning it over in his hands. It wasn't just traditional values or wanting you nearby. It was that every path you took that worked out, every success in your career, every adventure in the city, it challenged the story I told myself about my own life. He tossed the stone into the lake, watching ripples spread outward. I convinced myself that staying in Westbrook, taking over Dad's store, living exactly as my father had, that it was the only right way. The only way to honor family, and every time you thrived doing something completely different. It suggested there were other valid choices. I finished quietly. He nodded. Exactly. And that was uncomfortable. Made me question, too, many of my own decisions. It was perhaps the most honest conversation we'd ever had. Not complete reconciliation, not an erasing of past hurts, but a genuine moment of understanding between two adults with different perspectives. For what it's worth, I offered, I've always respected your commitment to the store, to Westbrook. It just wasn't my path. I'm starting to understand that, he acknowledged. Different doesn't have to mean wrong. We watched the last light fade from the sky, the first stars emerging above the tree line. In the growing darkness, I could almost feel my grandfather's presence. Not in any mystical sense, but in the legacy of wisdom and foresight that had created this moment of connection. The inheritance had forced a reckoning within our family. The frozen funds had created immediate consequences for behaviors long accepted as normal. The structured requirements had provided a framework for change that might never have happened organically. But the true inheritance wasn't the money, which would be spent and gone within years. It was the transformation of family dynamics, the challenging of destructive patterns, the creation of space for authenticity on all sides. As my father and I walked back to the cabin in the deepening twilight, I thought about the journey from that devastating Christmas dinner to this peaceful moment. The path hadn't been straight or simple. It had required standing firm when pressured, seeing beyond angry reactions to the fears beneath them, and maintaining boundaries while still leaving room for growth. Inside, I made coffee while my father examined the improvements I'd made to the cabin, the updated bathroom, the reinforced deck, the new bookshelves built from reclaimed wood. "You've taken good care of this place," he observed, running a hand along the smooth pine counter I'd refinished. "Better than I would have, probably." "Thanks, Dad," I said, handing him a steaming mug. "That means a lot." We sat at the kitchen table, the carved wooden box that had held my grandfather's letter now serving as a centerpiece. My father noticed it, recognition flickering in his eyes. "Dad made that box," he said quietly, "when I was about 12. Taught me how to do the dovetail joints." "I didn't know that," I admitted. "There's a lot we never talked about," he acknowledged. "A lot I never told you about growing up with him, about the store, about everything, really." This simple observation contained multitudes, an acknowledgement of communication failures, an implicit invitation to deeper dialogue, a recognition that our family narrative had significant gaps. "We can change that," I suggested, "if you want to." He nodded, wrapping his hands around the coffee mug. "I'd like that." As he prepared to leave an hour later, conversation having meandered through childhood memories and hardware store anecdotes and recent town developments, he paused at the door. "Your grandfather would be proud," he said simply, "of how you handled everything, of who you've become." Coming from my father, the man who had spent decades measuring my choices against his rigid standards and finding them wanting, These words represented a seismic shift. Not complete transformation, not instant healing of all past wounds, but movement in a direction that once seemed impossible. "Thank you," I replied, the simple phrase inadequate for the emotions behind it. After he left, I stood on the cabin porch watching his truck lights wind through the trees and disappear. The night was clear, stars brilliantly visible above the lake. I thought about inheritance, not just the financial legacy that had created this year of conflict and resolution, but the deeper inheritances that shape us. From my grandfather, I had inherited resilience, strategic thinking, and the courage to follow my own path. From my parents, despite our differences, I had inherited determination, work ethic, and a foundation of principles that I'd adapted rather than abandoned. Even from Kevin, I had inherited a certain pragmatism, a willingness to bridge divides when principles weren't at stake. These inheritances couldn't be frozen or withheld or legally challenged. They existed within me, integrated into the person I had become. The financial distribution had been a catalyst, but the true wealth lay in these intangible legacies and in the authentic connections that were finally becoming possible. I made one last cup of tea and sat on the dock again, listening to night. Sounds, crickets, distant owls, water lapping against wood. The inheritance situation wasn't perfectly resolved. My relationship with my family wasn't completely healed. Life would continue to present challenges and moments of regression alongside progress. But something fundamental had shifted. The $680,000 inheritance my grandfather had left, the money my parents had counted on and I had frozen when they rejected me, had served its purpose. Not just providing financial support, but creating the leverage needed to break entrenched patterns and begin building something new. As I gazed up at the constellations my grandfather had taught me to identify decades earlier, I felt profound gratitude for his foresight. He couldn't have predicted exactly how events would unfold, couldn't have known I would be disowned at Christmas dinner, or that freezing the inheritance would eventually lead to reconciliation. But he had understood the family dynamics well enough to create mechanisms that could address them, and he had trusted me to use those mechanisms wisely. In that trust, perhaps, lay the most valuable inheritance of all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.